As the world races to secure the raw materials needed for electric vehicles, renewable energy, and digital technologies, Africa, which is home to major deposits of cobalt, copper, platinum group metals, and rare earths, sits at a strategic crossroads. In Cape Town this week, ministers, investors, and civil society leaders are gathering at the African Mining Indaba and at a parallel intergovernmental summit to ask some tough questions about who actually benefits from the global rush for so-called critical minerals. What we know is that Africa supplies a large share of the minerals driving the energy transition. Yet most refining and value addition still happens outside the continent, while sadly many mining communities carry the environmental and social costs. And at the same time, geopolitical competition is accelerating. New investment and deal making across Africa is creating both opportunity and risk for the continent's industrial future. Well, to explore some of these issues, I'm now joined by Deprose Muchena, who's the Programs Director at the Open Societies Foundations. Deprose Muchena, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us on Channel Africa.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's lovely to see you again.
So let's begin with this. I mean, global competition for green minerals is hot, it's feverish, and the 2026 Africa Mining Indaba comes at a time when we're seeing surging prices, geopolitical rivalry, and also, I guess, renewed scrutiny about Africa's role in the global resource economy. Whether the continent can actually convert its natural resources into inclusive development, or are we going to repeat the same old cycle, extraction but exclusion? And I guess this is going to be on the table at this mining endeavor. What do you see as what's key and that really should come out in this year's mining endeavor? What's at stake?
Thank you very much, Peter. It's so important and Indaba this year that the Open Society Foundations is here, not just on its own, but with partners from around the continent and the world to participate in one of the most important conversations taking place. And what is at stake, as your question suggests, is not just an appreciation of the global competition that has transformed itself into a scramble for African resources. But the backdrop of this scramble is a fierce competition, what others call geopolitics and what others call geoeconomics, the competition for influence and power that is finding Africa as a supplier of resources needed, not just for energy transition in a decarbonized form, but also resources that are needed for the defense military industrial complex. What Africa needs to do is to turn this moment of critical mineral exploitation to meet Africa's needs so that the continent is able to decisively tackle the triple burden of unemployment, of poverty, and inequality, using the value that resides in our rocks, so that we don't just become the global quarry, but we become the site of value to distribute it for human development.
Okay, so that's the ambition, but what practical steps can we actually take to achieve that?
There are a number of steps we can take. One is that in our role as a continent, the African continent and its ability to deploy diplomacy is being tested here. The African continent needs to act together to strengthen its negotiating power by ensuring that it is not thinking in small units of individual countries. That is the first primary step to take, because the forces individual countries are confronting are much bigger, much mightier, create asymmetries of influence. So there is a message to countries that are attending the mining endeavor to work together jointly to negotiate so that you can influencing pricing, market segmentation, and market power. The second point is the critical importance of the African continent and others from the global south to ensure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So we must link the critical minerals value chain to the rest of the economy so that we can have economic transformation of national territories and of the continent so that it booms to reflect the richness of resources it has. Then, of course, the question of environmental and human rights stewardship. Mining should not take place at the cost of the environment of the people who live in communities. And the last point is to ensure that there is community empowerment. In each of the countries where we have mining taking place, communities need to be informed what we call free, prior, and informed consent for the extraction of resources. Link them and their activities to the value chains in the area, as well as protect them from harm. And these are the messages at the mining Indawa. And if they are taken seriously, then they represent the response to your question of the practical steps that need to be taken.
Okay, so one of the things as a journalist that I've seen for decades now is that we're very good at planning. We're very good with coming up with strategies. We often hear of strong policy frameworks like the Africa Mining Vision, the African Continental Free Trade Area, but it's always the implementation and execution that's problematic. How do we get this right?
I believe, and in the work that we are doing with African governments, with the African Union, with the regional economic communities, just yesterday on a panel that OSF participated in, we had the executive secretary of SADC, who is leading the industrialization efforts of this region. We all agree that steps have to be taken concretely to move from normative standards and framework into implementation. And we brought in lessons from other countries, nickel sector in Indonesia, where the government there has passed a law to ban export of raw material in the nickel sector so that you do beneficiation. And this is what we are beginning to see in Ghana, the production of gold, volumes and revenues much bigger in supply than from just the small scale sector than we find from the dominant mines. Individual countries like Guinea taking decisive measures to revise the mining contracts so that you get rid of these opaque, parasitic, extractive contracts that have limited value for the countries that own the mine and maximum value for others. And then the strength in linking everything else happening in the value chains to skills in the countries so that you have a skills pipeline that can respond to the needs of a modern mineral-led economy using what we need today, not what we needed yesterday. These are the tactics and steps that are being taken by individual countries, but what is needed is harmonization of these steps so that economies of scale produce bigger results and much more transformative impact for the continent. We will see at the end of the mining Indawa and in months to come whether these plans add to the implementation of plans that are already being implemented. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area has registered increased number of those countries that have ratified. I think we're now sitting at 48, which means that trade between African countries begins to grow, but it needs to grow at the level of Asia. It needs to grow at the level of Europe. And finally, we think that the linkage of all the value chain in the mining sector to women and youth in particular who are disproportionately impacted becomes another cardinal compass around which we drive African policy towards. We do these moves, I think the continent will result in a step further towards capturing its value and really developing itself.
Okay, so we often blame external factors and external scenarios in terms of some of our woes, but there are own goals that we score, and I'm going to point to governance. And I'm just wondering how much that contributes to some of the conflict, inequality, and democratic risk that we're seeing across the continent, especially when it comes to our minerals.
You are spot on, Peter. You can get all your pro-poor policies right, but faulty governance often nullify the impact of any pro-poor policies. A country that is giving social grants to enable population to recover from a storm, from poverty, from COVID-19, all these calamities that we deal with. That can all be fine. But if you have faulty governance, it means that there is leakages in the system. There is corruption in the system. We are seeing across our continent transfer pricing as a huge impact on revenue maximization. We are seeing overpricing of imports and underpricing of exports, reducing the income that could potentially come to the continent. We are also seeing other nefarious activity that take place all the time. So governance needs to be improved. Reforms of governance need to take place. But you can deal with that in a global context where there are additional forces playing against you. We must also acknowledge that systems of international trade and relations are rigged against producer countries. And we need to address that as well. The fact that all the manufacturing of lithium batteries, electric vehicles, semiconductors are taking place in continents outside of Africa is not by accident. History divided Africa and the rest of the world in the center and the periphery. That needs to change. So this is why the message OSF is giving at this mining Indaba is the ability of the continent to work together to decisively tackle these issues that we are dealing with.
Earlier, you mentioned communities, and I'm going to say communities and artisanal miners are often and frequently excluded or even criminalized, and yet they are a central reality to this sector. How do we make sure that their rights are not left behind, are not excluded, and that we make certain that everybody is at the table?
Communities are shareholders of resources that are being dug out of the communities they've lived in for centuries. Generations of present-day communities we deal with were owners of these resources. Today's communities are owners of these resources. That is why it is important to have what I've called community empowerment at the beginning of our discussion, which means targeting communities, especially young people and women, to see that their activities in the mining area is linked to the value chains at that level. Move with them from start to finish. Ensure that they are part and parcel of the value chain that you are building as the mine is being developed. That is one. Two, the communities need to have voice and agency so that the policies that are coming up to improve the community are not just descending on them without their participation in shaping them. It's also important that what we call artisanal miners, in some countries they are called illegal miners, we need to integrate them into the rest of the economy by better regulation, research on the skills that they need, opportunities that they could exploit. There is no reason why we should continue in 2026 to develop a mining sector that promotes enclave development, where there are signs and islands of prosperity in a sea of poverty. We cannot continue to have this situation where there are two parallel economies taking place in one country. Communities are at the center. If there is an initiative taking place in any community, we need to inform them. We need their prior consent. We need them to participate. And countries that are doing that are winning. Countries that don't do that will perpetually keep their populations as drawers of water and hewers of wood, or vice versa, whichever the correct term.
Perhaps finally, there are a lot of people who think that mining can become the uh, platform for Africa's broader economic transformation, and that maybe at this mining Indaba we could start to see signs of this transformation. What do we need to look out for to get clues and indicators that we are moving in the right direction and that this isn't going to be just another gathering and then we go back to where we were?
That's true. Mining stands as the critical catalyst that can transform the continent to fully realize its full potential. If we do the things that have been recommended almost on every panel, estimates are that we could be raising the GDP of mining by at least 24 billion, that this continent could be producing 2.3 billion jobs in this coming decade. And this is just in one sector of mining. If we move towards beneficiation and develop secondary industries associated with mining, that's again another opportunity for job creation. That's an opportunity for automation. That's an opportunity for regional integration. So mining could play a catalytic role in driving the African economy towards the full realization of the potential that resides in it. But also, as mining is led by people with effective leadership and commitment to the continent, we will be seeing the potential of the continent to negotiate in larger blocks with political force and influence around pricing, around value chains, around capturing value much more, licensing regimes that are more progressive, and eliminating corruption as well as other excesses that have let so much value leave the continent in the stone. There is an example that I will end with. In Mozambique, they mine heavy sands in northern Mozambique in Mampula. When that mine lands in Beijing to support construction industry, it opens up and becomes 4 to 5 byproducts. The value of the byproducts are much more than the raw ore that leaves the continent. If you go metal by metal, you will see that we are bleeding the continent of its own value. And the more we beneficiate at home, the more we come closer to this transformation dream that so many Africans are looking forward to their leaders implement, and minerals could be the pathway for that.
Deprose Muchena, Program Director at Open Society Foundation. Thank you so much indeed for joining us on Channel Africa.
Thank you, Peter. Hope to talk to you soon.